Maybe I'm recording. No, now you're recording too.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
So last week we had gone through that chapter on the powers, meaning our sense powers. And Arya Nagarjuna had brought us to the conclusion that those sense powers don't exist either, right?
No.
No, correct, right, no. But the sense powers have no nature. Well, wait a minute. How can something that has no nature be an existing thing? What exists if it has no nature?
It's not a nature coming from its side. A fixed one that all of us see the same way.
Ah, good. And then our Kachik, right, supposedly has been cooking that all week. I have to admit, I didn't pay too much attention to it. But we were gonna look to see if we could figure out why the next chapter is the chapter investigating the elements. So the elements, we recall, are the basic building blocks of our material world: earth, water, fire, wind, and space. So anybody have any thoughts about that before we go there? Why would we wait a minute, Nagarjuna, if my sense powers don't have any nature, what about blah? What is it that our sense powers do with those building blocks of our material world? We interact with them, right? And so, if I remember right, Kachik has said, but Nagarjuna, Lord Buddha taught that there are the five elements. The basis of our physical world is the five elements. And what our sense powers do is let us engage with the material world. They have to have some nature of being able to engage with the material world, because we have this material world that's made up of these five elements, and Buddha said so. And then Nagarjuna is going to say, right and wrong, in the sense of misunderstanding, number one, the conclusion of your sense powers have no nature, and number two, the misperception of what it means for there to be building blocks of our material world. So by now we understand that what he's going to do in this chapter on the elements is show us that, in fact, for there to be elements in our experience, those elements can't have any nature of their own, right? They have the nature of lacking a nature of their own so that they can be the nature of what is experienced, right? We understand that punchline. He doesn't actually say it. And how he gets us there in the chapter on the elements is he's going to mainly focus on the element of space, which is so interesting because it's the hardest one to wrap our minds around. And I remember the commentary was saying, right, and that's why he did it, because to try to wrap our minds around this element space helps us learn to wrap our minds around the presence of an absence, which is seeds for being able to experience directly ultimate reality, which is the absence of self-nature in all existing things, especially oneself. So it's very skillful, this chapter on investigating the elements. So with that in mind, let's go through our opening. Remember what chapter 1 was about. Remember what chapter 2 was about. 3, 4, we're at 5 or 6. And then we'll dig into the elements. So Elsie's at the top again. Thank you, my dear. Will you read our opening, please?
Thank you, Lama. Here I have made a song for you on the very root of the middle way, which I call wisdom. In the language of India, this text is called Prashna Nama Mula Madhyamaka Karika. In the language of Tibet, it is known as Uma Sewe Siklo Japashura. In English, we call it wisdom, a song on the root of the middle way. I bow down to Manjushri, the glorious gentle voice in his guise as a phoenix voice.
Thank you. And Pauline 1.1, please.
Sure, teacher. I bow down to the highest of teachers, to the fully enlightened one, who teaches us to reach that peace where our fantasies are about how things exist are put to a final rest.
Thank you. And Joanna 1.2.
I bow to the one who taught us that things happen in dependence. Nothing ends and nothing begins. Nothing stops, but nothing ever lasts forever. Nothing comes and nothing goes. No two things are different, nor are any two the same.
Remember when that verse was so confusing? It's not anymore, is it? Yay. And Rakana 1.3.
Did you mention my name, Lama?
I did, please, 1.3.
Thank you. Nothing grows from itself. Nothing grows from something else. Nothing grows from both. And nothing grows without a cause. There is nothing at all that grows at all.
So
now
what's the cause of everything? Our past behavior. But wait, my past behavior is long gone. How can it be a cause for something?
Imprinted. I was going to ask, with the elements, is it the same thing as when we say, as when we see the blue sky? Like, I'm perpetuating the seeds every time that I see blue, for example. When I have water in my hands, it's like, is it something similar like the mind-only school, how it explains the sky, the blue, the color blue of the sky?
I don't understand what you're asking.
No? Okay, I'll try to. I just woke up. I'm trying to, even
Okay.
myself, trying to figure out more. Thank you. Sorry for the confusion.
So chapter 1 was about the things we believe are the causes for other things. And he identified them and then said there aren't any other causes for things in our worldly experiences, because there are other causes for things than the ones he's mentioned. The imprints made by what we see ourselves think, do, and say. He doesn't mention that as a cause because that's not included in worldly causes for things. And
I was
then he points out, all of those things that we think are causes, they have no nature. He doesn't say they're not causes. They have no nature of being the cause in them, from them, as we understand.
okay. No, I was thinking of the elements when you were starting the class. And it came to my mind when we studied the color blue of the sky. And the elements are the elements as that blue sky is out as well. It's blue, the color blue of the sky, right? Water is water, earth is earth, fire is fire. So
Now, the elements are the characteristics of our physical world.
right.
So the solidity in anything is its earth element. It's not just the dirt and the earth and our sphere. It's the solidity of anything. And in our material world, any existing thing has to have some amount of solidity to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And then water element is the fluidity of anything. Fire element is the temperature of anything. The wind element is the movability of anything. Even a rock has a certain amount of wind element. And then space is the place it's in.
But how do we perpetuate them as we perpetuate the blue sky?
Because when we perceive a material thing, included in our perception of the material thing pen is that this pen has solidity, fluidity, temperature, movability, and a place that it's in. So we're perpetuating our material world by experiencing our material world.
Okay.
And then, right, our Kachik is saying, and Buddha said so in First Turning of the Wheel. He talked about the sense powers and how they engage in the outer world and how that outer world is made up of this and this and this and this and this. And he kept saying all of these existing things. Let's learn about all of these existing things. And then, of course, he went on to say they're all suffering. But if we didn't follow along then with his later teachings, which was why they're all suffering and where that suffering all comes from, that comes in the Perfection of Wisdom sutras, we would be in that space of saying, no, there really is a material world and it's changing all the time. And that it's impermanent. And so it's suffering. And how we interact with it increases or decreases the amount of suffering we have in it, but it's a real thing. All right, so where's the Kachiks that he's talking about are Buddhists, but Buddhists that when they hear him say things have no nature, their mind automatically flops over into, well, then they must not exist at all. And their response is, but Buddha said, blah, in First Turning of the Wheel, right? So we're trying to access that part of our automatic, ignorant behavior that comes up with a reason why it can't, the previous chapter's conclusion can't be true. And we do it only because we misunderstand the conclusion. When we understand the conclusion, it'll be, oh, right. And that's true for everything. And we could skip to the last chapter. But I know my own mind still hears, what? No causes at all? What? No going? at all? What? Yeah. So it's useful to like let ourselves see how we try to reject out of our ignorance and security and thinking that this world is some solid thing that gives us some protection before we automatically allow our growing wisdom to show up. We do want it to show up, of course, but we want to use it to weed out that automatic, oh, so it doesn't exist at all. Okay.
Thank you, dear Lama.
Thank you for asking. So he said no causes. No, he didn't. He said no causes that aren't ripening seeds. So yes, worldly causes work sometimes and don't work other times, because sometimes we have the seeds for them to work, right? Sometimes our seeds are making the cause work and the apparent cause work, and sometimes our seeds are making the apparent cause not work, right? Either way, there's no cause from its own side. And then we go, but wait a minute, right? I do stuff, I do so cause things to happen. And then we investigated the going and coming. Was the conclusion of that, no, we never go anywhere? No, but the conclusion was the way we go is by way of our perceptions shifting, and then we're at the grocery store, right? And shifting, and then we're back home. And then we go, you know. So then at the end of no going and coming, that was a long chapter. We must have interpreted there's no nature of going and coming into, well, then I don't do anything. Nagarjuna, are you saying it's not real that I do stuff? You know, I interact with my world through my powers of senses. I do stuff. And he says, well, let's check those 6 powers and see what's going on there. And he points out that when we say my eyes see, my ears hear, what we're implying to ourselves is that the eyeball has some function and nature in it to see. And same with the others. And we investigated whether or not that could be true. And we came to see that in fact, it can't be true in the way that we think. Is it true that the eye takes in light, the retina does its thing, it sends information to the part of the brain does its thing, then our consciousness of what we're seeing awakens? Yes, that does happen for those who are sighted, of course. And it all happens through the power of past kindness, if it's a good thing that we have vision, which I think it is. And then we did that for all the others as well, if you recall. So in all of these chapters so far, he's showing us how to look at relationships between things. He's given us different methods of looking at relationships between things to see if the relationship that we believe is happening can really be happening. So chapter 3, the analysis of the powers, meaning the sense powers. And then we went to the heaps. So somehow our Kachik said, wait a minute. If you're saying I don't have sense powers, then you would be saying I don't have a heap of form. And Buddha taught where we're made up of those 5 heaps. So we must have said something about, no, it can't be true that the powers don't have any nature because I have 5 heaps. And it's like, I'm not sure that would be what I would come up with thinking I don't have sense powers, but maybe it would. It's like I do so have eyeballs. I do have a heap of form. And he goes, well, let's take a look at that. And at the conclusion of that chapter, he makes this statement about when someone criticizes someone else for using emptiness as an explanation for things, the person is just proving emptiness, which is really interesting. That's a very slippery argument. So the 4th chapter is investigation to the parts of a person, meaning those 5 heaps, not meaning, fingers, toes, the 5 heaps. And that's where we start chapter 5. So Nagarjuna has said, no, your heaps have no nature either. Meaning no nature of their own, from their own side. Do they have a nature of being, of us having 5 heaps? Yes, if we understand that the nature they have is the nature of our seeds ripening us having them. But even the language, when we say, yes, my 5 heaps have a nature, the one that I give them, we've stated it wrongly. Because to just say the 5 heaps have a nature puts our consciousness back into of their own. So he goes into the nature of the elements that make up the heap of form. So he's zeroing in on the heap of form, which, I think we have to admit is the one we most relate to, right? That when we think of our me, a big part of me is this physical thing still. So he's going to zero in on the elements of our material heap to help us understand what he meant in chapter 4 about the heaps having no natures. So let's dig in. Janet, will you please share 5.1 and 2?
Not even the slightest bit of space could exist prior to the definition of space. Suppose it were present prior to the qualities which define it, it would have to be one which lacked its defining qualities. An entity which had none of the qualities which define it is not something that could ever exist in any way at all. If an entity has no defining characteristics and were absent, then what would we apply the definition to? So in ACI 13, this is defining characteristics and the difference between changing things and non-changing things. And a functional thing is a changing thing. If the sky is blue, at one point it wasn't, and then it changed blue and it changes color. If it is a changing thing, therefore, it's a functioning thing. But he's getting to that things don't exist from their own side. It's how we perceive it. These functioning things are how we perceive it. And as a functioning thing, at one point, the sky was not blue and then it became blue. So where was the blue? It wasn't always there. And in this example of space, he's saying space is not a changing thing. And emptiness is not a changing thing. I guess that's the argument about whether things come from their own side when they're not functioning things. When things are functioning things and they're changing, they're not coming from their own side because they're changing. And then when something is, well, he's going to say when something is staying the same, it's also coming from our own side. So anyway, we kind of know the answer that things are coming from our own side until they're not, but for the sake of our seats, they're coming from our own side. And maybe this has a little bit to do with that ACI 13 of definitions and debating.
Right.
So,
Right. Thank you. When we use the term definition, we don't mean the words in the dictionary of what's meant by the word space. What we mean by the definition of space is how we recognize the space that's there. How is it that we determine there's space or earth element or water element? So the definingness, how we define something here is meant how we recognize it. How do we establish it as being there is what we mean by defining it. And ignorance says the object defines itself so that we can perceive it. And wisdom is showing us that no, in fact, we define the object by experiencing it. And that whole process isn't by choice. It's forced on us as a result of some past cause. And that past cause is the mental imprint made by how we interacted with others before. And so Janet pointed out that any of the other elements he would have addressed using a different argument. He could have used the argument of causes and conditions. He could have used the argument of what came before. We would use different arguments to show us that the elements that are changing can't then have their elemental nature in them, because then they couldn't change. But then space is an unchanging thing. It is one of the 5 elements, an existing thing that we understand what's meant by a space is empty space, meaning the place where material things are where they, I want to say where they're located. And that space is actually an absence of obstruction. Right? The pen can't get into the space that's here because something's already in it. But the space that's here, right, is still available, is it not? The pen can't get in it, but it's still there available. So the stapler, this is a stapler, can stay there. If when the stapler comes into this space, the space changes, it wouldn't be the space for the stapler to be in. So if space changes by something going in or out of it, then that in or out of it couldn't happen. Right? We've studied that before. And it's really I found that meditation, right? The 4 spaces meditation was really, really helpful in wrapping my mind around how it could be that one could experience emptiness, experience knowing emptiness of something is present even before I've seen it directly, even before I can see it directly all the time. In the same way that when there's an object located anywhere, it must be in a space. I can't see the space. I can't see the space even when the space is available to be seen because it has no visual thing, right, to pick up on. But I know the space is there. And I know it's still there when the stapler's in it, when the pen is in it, when my hand is in it. So although I can't see the space my hand is in when my hand is in it, I know it's there. And what's growing in us is this ability to see, at least see intellectually, that something that we're experiencing is our seeds ripening and so lacking self-nature. Right? In the same way that the empty space the stapler is in is implied and part of the experience, so can the emptiness of the yelling boss and the emptiness of my back pain and that, right, can be included in my experience of it if I can get this thing about material things and space well processed. I can do the same thing with karmic seeds and emptiness. So I think it's really, really beautiful that he used space, but then also it takes a different series of investigations to come to the conclusion that an unchanging thing can't have any nature of its own either. So it gives us another tool for investigating, any unchanging thing by way of the method that he uses in this chapter, which has to do with space and how we know it's there, its defining qualities. And if something has defining qualities, I'm not sure I can verbalize this. If it has its own defining qualities, then the object and its defining qualities either have to be happening sequentially or simultaneously. And he helps us look at this relationship between the element space and its defining quality, the absence of obstruction, to see how those two things come together, which of course they can't. And that's where this chapter is going to take us, is how do we investigate the true what we believe is the true nature of an unchanging thing. Right? And specifically the unchanging thing called space as one of the building blocks of our material world, the place where material things are. Got it? So he's saying, in order to know space, we have to be able to recognize it. And if there's something in space that makes us recognize space, is it in it already? Was it in it before space was there? Or did space show up and then its defining qualities show up? Or is its defining qualities over here and it's over here and somehow they come together? Or do they both appear simultaneously from themselves? Right? None of it makes any sense. And that's where he's going to help us go. Right, so if we understand it already, we can just go to chapter 6. But if we want to dig in a little bit more, we go through his chapter 5 to see his reasoning. So shall we do it? So remember the word definition, defining, it's how do we recognize the empty space? How do we know it as empty space? All right, so where were we? Elsie, will you read for us, please?
Thank you, Lama. 5.3. No definition could ever apply to one which had no qualities to define it. Where it did possess qualities which define it, none would apply. Neither could they apply to something else that neither possessed these qualities nor lacked defining qualities.
So if space needs no qualities to define it, then there wouldn't be any defining qualities to it. Right? If we say space doesn't need any defining qualities, it defines itself. Well, if it defines itself, it has defining qualities. And if it doesn't have defining qualities, then how can you say it's a thing there? Because you wouldn't be able to recognize it. It can't have its own defining qualities, and it can't not have any defining qualities. And we're going to see that there aren't defining qualities until there's a thing to be defined. You know, Nagarjuna is saying, look, just use reasoning, clear thinking. How can space define itself? How can Earth define itself? Tracy's there. Would you care to read?
Sure.
Yay. 5.4a and 5.4b, please.
Okay. Where there is no application of a definition, neither can the classical example be correct. If the classical example were not correct, then neither could the definition exist.
Yeah, I'm not clear what they mean by classical example. I'm sorry, I didn't look at it closely enough to dig that up. I'm gonna guess that it means the classical example of space would be the textbook definition of space. Right, so if we really did go to the dictionary and look up what's meant by space and use that as the definition, and then try to go find space based on that definition, we probably couldn't. We may or may not be able to find this thing called space based on the words of a dictionary. Either because the words of the dictionary are incorrect. If the words in the dictionary are incorrect, we couldn't use them to find the thing that they're trying to define because they're not defining it accurately. And even if they are defining it accurately, they still can't help us find that thing called space until we understand the experience of it, which doesn't come through the words of the definition, even when it's accurate. Ugh, seems like we're stuck. Let's go back up to LC 5A.
Thank you, Lama. And so neither is the definition something that could exist. For the classical example, is not something that could ever exist.
Right, so if by the classical example of space can't be accurately described by the classical definition of space, then how could we ever establish that space is there? Right? He's pointing out how our minds would go, of course space is there. Here it is all around us. Nagarjuna, what are you trying to do? He's not trying to deny that there's space. He's helping us understand how we think we know space is there because it's space. It's here in it of it has to be here for there to be a material world. And he goes, no, actually, right? It has to be there for our physical material world because it was in every seed you ever planted in your interaction with the material world. So yes, there's space all around, but not something from its own side with its own defining qualities or characteristics, because if that's how space were, we couldn't, right? It would be its own thing, independent of other factors, unaffected by anything else, which means we couldn't move from one space to the next, right? A space that has its own nature we couldn't, right? We couldn't do what we do. And it's hard to get that as a logical conclusion. Oh my gosh, space from its own side is impossible. The space from my side that's all around me is invisible. Space is invisible in one way, but very visible in another. All right, let's go on. Pauline. 5B and 6A.
Yeah, okay, teacher. There does not at all exist any entity which is not subsumed either by definitions or by things which are defined. Sorry, excuse me. If there is no such thing as an entity, then how could there be something which has its absence? Teacher, 6B as well?
No, let's wait.
Okay.
Which comes first? The space or the definition of space? Definition of space meaning recognizing space. Doesn't space have to be there first for us to recognize it?
Actually, teacher, I think space is always there, but we cannot recognize it because it's an absence. So I can't recognize space unless there is something that can take over the space. Then I know there is a space there.
Right. So space is always there.
Yeah.
Independent of being recognized by anybody.
You can say so. Yeah.
Yeah, so then the space must have its own defining characteristics in it to be the space that's there, regardless of anybody recognizing it. If it's there all the time, it has defining characteristics for it to be there. Any existing thing is established as existing by being perceived by a valid perception, right? So, can the space be there independent of its defining characteristics? No. So, space depends on its defining characteristics. Seems like it.
Which is the absence of obstruction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The words, right? What we mean by those words, the experience we mean by those words. But then that means that the defining characteristics of space, which establish space as being there, that must come first. We must first establish space as the absence of obstruction before we can see space there, before we can know space is there. We have to have this defining characteristic in our mind. So that means there's defining characteristics of space independent of space. How is that possible? No space there to be recognized, even if we know the words, absence of obstruction. If there's no space there to fit that defining characteristic, then the words of the defining characteristics can't make something appear, right? If we have just the definition and I don't mean the words definition. If we have the defining characteristics of space happening independent of space, they're not the defining characteristics of space. His point's going to be, you don't have space and its defining characteristics coming together. Because that would mean you would have an instant where there was one without the other. Can there be an instant of space independent of its defining characteristics? It's somebody defining it to be there. No. And can there be somebody defining space to be there without space being there? That's what makes space be there. Oh, so you have the defining characteristic arise in your mind first, and then space shows up. No, because that means there would be the defining characteristic existing independent of space, and it wouldn't apply to anything. And that's not a defining characteristic. A defining characteristic means what pops up that makes us recognize something there. So that defining characteristic idea is coming close to the idea of mental seed popping up and establishing something's presence. And as we're as we're even thinking of that, remember the pot on the stove and then the silver seed cracking open, making the pot on stove. I don't know about you, but my own mind is still imagining there's a thing on the stove, undefined thing. And my silver seed makes it into that pot for me, unique to me, right? That's mind only school level. There's a thing there first, and my silver seed defines it for me into that pot. And although that's not technically accurate according to higher school, it's enough to see, oh my gosh, my seeds are doing that with everything. So everything is defined by my perceiving it, my perception of it, which technically more accurately would be by my projection of it, when we understand projection meaning ripening karmic seeds of it. So we could say everything is established by my ripening karmic seed, even the me doing it, right? So when Geshe-la describes the seeing the pot on stove, probably more accurately, but not for that audience, would be your seed ripens me seeing pot on stove, right? The seed is, you're included in the seed ripening, which means, right, we're changing too. So again, we're trying to pin down this process through which we are experiencing ourselves in a material world using the 5 elements and using space as the most difficult one to investigate in order to show ourselves that the space, the earth, the fire, the wind, they can't have the natures in them that we're holding on to be the most basic nature of our material world, because by way of recognizing them, we're bringing their definition to the party. It's not in them. It can't be in them, because if it is, they'd be there all the time and it wouldn't involve us. And if they had no defining, if there were a thing there with no defining characteristics, they wouldn't need defining characteristics. They're already there. And if you can have a defining characteristic before you have the thing that it's defining, then the defining characteristic is there for a moment, not defining the thing, in which case it's not the defining of the thing. Right? Again, not the words, the experience. So he's done that. He's showed us how to do that with an unchanging thing space. And then now he's going to go into, well, what about functioning things? And remember, there was that, I think it comes in course 13, like, is space is an unchanging thing, but does it function? Right? To help us understand this distinction between existing unchangingly and existing changing. And as Janet pointed out, anything that changes functions. And so when we're looking at functioning things versus not functioning things, it seems like there's some big difference between them, because a functioning thing must have some nature of its own that makes it function in the way it does, because other things don't function like that. They have their own function, right? So it might be easier to recognize that an unchanging thing relies upon our personal, what we bring to the party. But for changing things, come on, for functioning things, their function is in them, which is why pens write and clothespins don't. So let's see where he goes with that. No, it's break time. Let's take a break. Okay, we're recording again, but we just lost 5 minutes. Because I'm such a dolt. Let's go back. Space, think space. Got it? That space is not a functioning thing. Yeah, we know that. That space that you're thinking, it's also not an existing thing that performs no function. And that space that you're thinking, it's not something to be defined, and it's not a definition itself. Why not? Does the space that you're thinking of exist? How does it exist?
Negation?
Okay. And how does the negation exist? Okay, let's go back. Space. Think space. Honestly, the space that you're thinking of, do you believe that it's out there? The one that you're thinking of is something that's out there. You're sitting in it, for crying out loud. Does that space that you're thinking of that's there, that you're in, is it functioning? You know, admittedly, we would say, sure, it's functioning for me to be in it. But then we know to go, no, that means it changes by me being in it, and that would kick me out. No, 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 it can't be like that. But that space is still there, isn't it? We just took away a belief that it is a changing thing. Okay, but that space I'm thinking of, it's there, I'm sitting in it. And by my sitting in it, I don't change it, I don't affect it, because it's there. Is that space there? Is what I'm asking. I'm asking for the invisible and the impossible. Right? The space we're thinking of, we think is there. Which means by knowing it as there, it has been defined. Right? As soon as I say think space and you do, you've defined space. There's something included in our defining of space that's mistaken. The space we define, that we come to know, think we know is there, is a space that has its own definition in it.
Is it the stock answer that it does, but it's not the way we think? It's coming from
Yeah.
It's the stock answer.
It's the stock answer, but I'm trying to help us feel it. Right? Think space. We're thinking of something that we think is there already, right? Because it's there, it's there, it's there, it's there. But it's not. Do you see? And then when I say that, my own mind goes, what? Like I'm hanging out in a vacuum until my seed ripens that there's space there? It's like, no, because every seed ripening that has a material world part of it has space in that seed. So I can never ripen a seed that doesn't include the place for material things to be in. And there's no space other than that. But see, my mind just went again. It's like, oh, in reality, there's no space. No, there's no space and there's no not space. It's like, wait, that doesn't make sense. You have to have one or the other. No, you don't. So do you see how he got us there? How do we recognize space? Oh, it's the absence of obstruction. Right. So is the space there? And then we impose absence of obstruction to recognize that space is there? That can't be, because then space can exist independent of its defining characteristic. Nothing exists independent of a defining characteristic, because a defining characteristic is what defines it, makes it there. Oh, so the defining characteristic has to come first. Well, if the defining characteristic comes first, and there isn't the thing that it defines, then it's not a defining characteristic. It's something else. Because what it is to be a defining characteristic is it defines something. So you can't have a defining characteristic first and then the thing, and you can't have the thing before the defining characteristic. And do they happen simultaneously? When we say something happens simultaneously, it already implies this one's there and that one's there, and they come together to have this, right? To have this, you have to have this guy, and then Vic happens. But you can't ever find the moment that happens, right? And further, that would mean this one exists and that one exists independent of each other in order for this one to exist. In which case, neither one needs the other. So there's no need to do this because you've already got. You see? So he's pointing that out about space, an unchanging thing that is an absence of obstruction, to help us plant the seeds for being able to wrap our minds better around the absence of self-existence, the absence of the very natures he's using this whole book to show us we believe are true but can't be. So it seems like a pretty important chapter, although it's a short one and it comes early. I predict that we'll be using this argument again and again. Does the thing exist there before we recognize it? And come on, admittedly, we would say yes. You know, does space exist there for us to learn about it? Sure seems like it. Does the pine tree exist in your backyard so that you can show it to somebody else? Sure seems like it. But can anything exist before some observer, some experiencer of it establishes it to exist? No. Well, then that means the pine tree disappears every time I stop perceiving it, right? right? I don't know. What's there when all the pens and all the people and all the puppies go away? But what would it be like to go through life like that? Every time you turn your back, you don't know whether the room is still there. And you have to turn back to make sure that it is. It would like be terrifying. Yeah, a horror movie. You'd never want to close your eyes. It's like, oh my gosh, my material world would disappear. But it doesn't seem to, does it? All right, let's go on. Wait, let's not go on yet. So did you get the thing about space? Think space. It's already there, right? So I could think about it. Wrong. The space we're thinking of doesn't exist. It's impossible. So the space we're sitting in can be here, is here. As long as there is a material world, it will be here. But not the one we're thinking. That one's not there, never has been, can't be, won't be. It's impossible. The one that is there is the one that is instantly and constantly, repeatedly defined within our seed ripening, brought into being by our seed ripening material world. So think space. Is it changing a little bit? Think space. Not the one that's there already that you're thinking of, the one that's ripening out of your seeds of your material world. Think space. Think space. Can you get even a glimpse of your seeds ripening, making the space? This instant, this instant, this instant, this instant. And no space other than that. Which means there is space. Because it's in your seeds. Now let's go on. Where are we? Janet. 57B2 and 58, please.
The other, that's where we
Yeah.
are. The
Yes.
other 5 elements are the same as space as well. But they're not they're changing things. Those of lesser intellect cannot see the piece of putting to rest what they think they see. They hold the view that things can only exist and they can never exist.
Yeah, I love that you pointed out how funny it is that he says the other 5 elements are the same as space. When they're not the same as space because they're functioning things. Wait a minute. Think of those other elements. So let's put another element into 5.7 A and B to show us what Janet just perceived in that 5.7. Put in earth, solid, solidity. Think earth. Right, what comes to mind is dirt. But that's not quite the element. The element is solidity. Think solidness. that solidness that we're thinking of, right? A quality of hardness, firmness, form of our material world. We're thinking of something that exists that now we're thinking of, that we weren't thinking of before. But it was there somewhere, and now we turned our mind to it. That space, do we think it's that solidity, do we think it's a functioning thing? Yes, we do. Buddha taught it's a functioning thing. It does something. It holds the pine tree up. Otherwise, without its earth element, it would just like melt into a puddle. It functions to hold things up. Think solidity. Wait, says Nagarjuna, it's not a functioning thing, nor is it an existing thing that performs no function. Right, because it holds the tree up. Neither is it something there first that then gets defined by us. And neither is it something with no definition at all. Because if it doesn't get defined at all, it can't be established as being there. If it defines itself, it doesn't need anybody to establish it as being there. And then it doesn't need anybody to do its thing, in which case there's no thing for it to do. So that earth element that you're thinking of, does it exist? If it doesn't, the tree is going to melt. But if it does in the way that you're thinking of it, the tree can't be there at all. Is the tree there? Yes. So what earth element is there? The one you're thinking of? Or the one that's coming out of your seeds by thinking of it, right? As you're thinking of it, not by thinking of it, but as you're thinking of it, the earth element is the earth element that's there ripening from our seeds now and 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 now. So now think of earth element. Is there one there before you think of it? No. By thinking of it, does it make earth element be more real for us? I hope so. Like we're sitting on our chair's earth element. What's the piece of putting to rest what we think we see? Doesn't it seem more peaceful to just leave well enough alone and let things have their identities in them and just decide to be more kind? How does all of this, it can't be on its own. It can't be, it has to be from me. Does that bring us to peace? It seems like it brings us to struggle. I think it's just a phase. Those of lesser intellect cannot see the peace of putting to rest what they think they see. Right, so we just did it a little bit when I said think space. When you think space now, are you thinking of a space that's already there? Or is there a hint of thinking of the space that's coming from you, for lack of better words? Thinking of a space that just comes into being by way of thinking of it. I just noticed my own mind. It's like, okay, I can think of space that just came into being by my thinking of it, but underlying that, there is still the space that happened in. Oh, nuts. I didn't quite get it yet. When we hold things in the old ordinary way, then included in the ordinary way of seeing them is their identities and qualities in them, from them. They exist like that. And if somebody's trying to tell me they don't exist like that, then they can't exist at all. That's what he's pointing out in this last few lines of 5.8. That very automatic reaction. Sorry. That very automatic reaction that my mind does when I'm doing my own, logical analysis and deciding the thing can't exist with its identity in it, from it, and in the next instant, my mind goes to, well, then it can't exist at all, right? And I use my training to pull back and find that middle way. As we come up against our belief in things as self-natures, our ignorance, and we push against that, the automatic conclusion is one or the other. It's either there the way we think or it's not there at all. And we're trying to learn to see the absurdity of both of those statements. When we're in that space of the obviousness of every moment of experience being unique to the individual, this individual and that individual, all driven as results of causes made by our interaction with others, the peace that comes is, all I need to do is be kind, helpful, thoughtful, to the best of my ability, which sometimes is like this much. But to just be trying, it, knowing that that's how you're creating your future, that's the peace he's talking about. It would be peaceful to just know that my kindness, right? I'm so sorry. Something's trying to be said that can't be said. Here ends the 5th chapter of Wisdom, an investigation of the elements. And if you recall, we took the time to go back through the different elements, didn't we? We all took a different element and we investigated it. I learned a lot from that. But now, what does our Kachik come up with? He's just showed us that the basic building blocks of our material world have no natures. And so if we let ourselves go there, we would be saying, what, Arya Nagarjuna, you're saying my material world doesn't really exist? You know, what's our response going to be? What's our yeah, but? Yeah, but? Janet, what do you think?
No, the response is, yes, it exists. Here, I'll take a hammer and I'll smash your hand. That's what someone said to me once. And my the shaman that was I shared that with, that was trying to clear, she said, I would try to avoid those people.
I would try to avoid those people. Just serve them tea. Don't talk to them about. That's a wise response. Yeah, but that's exactly right. My material world does so exist. It has to, because I'm in it. I don't remember what chapter 6 is. Anybody? Before we go and peek. We've already done the heaps. We've done the powers. We've done the heaps. Now we've done the elements.
But there's something about feeling in the first line.
Yeah, I know. There's a right?
So I guess Kachik says something like, I feel things.
I feel things.
So there must be things exist in the way.
Perfect. Perfect. Because there was that series of chapters that were about I want, right? Wanting and liking and grasping, and that led into the subject-object interaction discussion, and that led eventually into the subject. Yeah, nice. Well done. My world does too exist because there are things I like and things I don't like. Right? I feel things. Let's go peek, right? At the end of chapter 6. Oops, past it. Well done, Joanna. An investigation of desire and the one who feels it. My world does so exist because I like donuts. Sorry, Mr. Kachik. Let's see. I don't actually like donuts so much, but I used to. Okay, so Arkachika says, my material world does too exist because there are things I like. There are things that feel good. And let's see where he goes. Tracy, please. Wait, I don't have the whole thing up here. Oops, I can't get the whole thing up here. Yeah, there, sort of. Okay.
If there were,
6.1. Mhm.
sorry?
6.1 and 2a, this whole verse, please.
Okay. If there were to exist one who did not feel the desire prior to the desire itself, then based on this, they would possess it. The desire would have to exist since there would exist someone who felt the desire. If there were none who felt the desire, how could there be any desire there?
Wow. So we have said my material world does too exist because there are things that I like, right? Things that give me pleasure, things that I desire. So Nagarjuna puts us like in this experience. Think of something that you like a lot. Is there a you there first before the thing? Okay, so let's call it a piece of triple berry pie. Do I believe there's a me here before there's a triple berry pie piece on my plate? Yes, of course I believe that. And did I desire triple berry pie? Did the me drinking tea, was I desiring triple berry pie before I knew of triple berry pie? You know, you would say, sure, if you've ever had it before and you liked it, then probably every moment of your existence, you're still wanting more of it. So you could say you have desire for triple berry pie in you. But did I have desire for triple berry pie before I'd ever had triple berry pie? No, right? I had to have had it first. Oh, this is yummy. I want more. Yeah, more now, more later, doesn't matter. I liked it. It gave me pleasure. I want more pleasure. Pleasure comes from triple berry pie. I want triple berry pie. But not until triple berry pie has given me pleasure once, right? Okay, so I'm there first. Then I learn that there's desirability in the triple berry pie. And then I want it. So the desire for triple berry pie is in the triple berry pie, right? No. The desire for triple berry pie is in me, right? Well, no, not until the triple berry pie was experienced. Because if it's in me, from me, it would have been in me, from me, without ever experiencing triple berry pie. Right? It depended. The desire that's in me now depended on triple berry pie that had no desire in it. How does that work? Is there a desire for triple berry pie that is something in and of its own that I suddenly have because I've tasted triple berry pie and now I have this quality, desire for triple berry pie? No. But wait, can I have desire for triple berry pie without being a me here? No. Do you see how absurd it is? You can't really pin down what's going on in our experience, desire for triple berry pie. There's no me independent of that experience. There's no it independent of me having that experience. But me just experiencing I want triple berry pie doesn't make triple berry pie show up. And admittedly, there could be a triple berry pie that does show up that doesn't give me the pleasure that I expected from it. Then what's up with that? You know, that's when we get mentally afflicted. Or when there is triple berry pie, but for some reason I can't have any of it. What? What's up with that? Right? Those two levels of selfishness that kick in. So we've just said there is to a material world because there are things in it that I like and I want and they give me pleasure. And he says, you know, let's look at that. You're there first, and then you have a desire for the thing, or the desire is there first, or the thing has the desire in it and it has to be there first. Like, are these things independent existing entities and then they come together and we have our experience? He's pointing out how we think wrongly about our experiences. And we're believing there's a me here, and stuff happens to it. I mean, admittedly, that's how we go through life, right? All right, let's see where he's going to go. How much time do we have? If nobody's there who feels the desire, how can there be any desire there? That makes sense, right? All righty. I don't know where we were. Roxana, please, 6.2b.
Thank you. It's the same from either state, whether the desire exists or doesn't exist, with the one who feels it.
So we just said that me having desire for triple berry pie can't be coming from the pie, and it can't be coming from me, but something's happening because it's there. It seems like in this verse, he's saying, well, in all those moments that you're not having desire for triple berry pie, that's happening in the same way. It's not coming because there's no triple berry pie there. And it's not coming because there's something in me making me not want triple berry pie, right? He's pointing out that whether we're desiring for something in the moment or not desiring something in the moment, it's still not happening because of the subject-object interaction reaction from their own sides. We know the punchline, it's all coming out of seeds. But he's trying to help us recognize our misperceptions about ourselves. So let's just go on here. That was a hard one. Elsie, please, 6.3.
Thank you, Lama. It would be incorrect for the desire and the person who feels it to just grow together, because if it were that, they could not rely upon each other.
Right, you see, if this is there already and this is there already, they're already there. They don't have to rely upon each other to be there. But if this one depends on this one to be this one, then when this one's not there, neither is this one. And so what comes first? Something has to come first. Is it Ving Ving?
Sorry, Lama. But if the desire is there, and I mean, if desire exists first, or the person exists first, then it would be the same for everybody, right? The level of desire plus the feeling of desire for a certain thing would be the same for everyone. But
If it was coming from the thing.
yeah, if it was coming from that thing. So because it is unique to each of us, so I'm and because we know seeds. So our perception of it is what creates the desire.
Correct. The seed ripening desire in it is what creates the desire of the perception of the object.
So if the way I look at it, that it looks like I have to be there first,
right,
before the desire can be there,
right.
because I'm the creator of that desire for whatever it is that I want.
Right. Right. And is that correct?
Not entirely.
Right. It sure feels like it. I'm there first, and then the desire comes up. Yes, Roxana.
Thank you. I'm trying to piece this together, dear Holy Lama. Let's take, for example, ladies who are pregnant, right? Some say that they have cravings, that they have the desire to eat certain different things. I was pregnant and I didn't get any cravings. Okay. It's like, oh, I need to eat this. And if you don't bring it, something's going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's craving something or has the desire for something. And they do not get to have that particular food or candy or whatever it is.
Right.
What seeds are perpetuating to continue craving or not craving, or how does it work? Because I know we're planting seeds and I know there are projections that are ripening for me to have a craving for something, right? So what's going on with that particular type of desire of the triple berry?
Right. So you're pointing out that we can have desire for something that we don't even have access to. So you're showing that it's not the piece of triple berry pie that triggers the desire. This piece, it was some previous piece, which, Nagarjuna would say, right, proof, of seeds being planted. But we don't think of it that way. We think, no, I just experienced it and it was pleasurable. And so every similar piece, I expect to get the same kind of pleasure. And then you're pointing out that we can have a desire arise for the pleasure that object is supposed to give us, even without the object being there.
Right.
Which shows us that it's not in the object.
Right.
So
it's a ripening.
It's a ripening, right? It's a ripening happening. And then that ripening would have to have been grown seeds from some way in which we triggered in someone else a craving for something, right? A wanting something. And I mean, probably we do that a lot. You say to someone, you serve someone dinner. Are you ready for dinner? Right. I'll make dinner at 6 o'clock. We've triggered in them a desire for dinner at 6 o'clock. And then most of the time we carry through. But, maybe there were times when, would you like a cup of tea? Sure, I'd love a cup of tea, but we get distracted and we never actually deliver them the cup of tea. That could be seeds, right? In this one-on-one correlation, that could be some point in which something triggers in us a desire for something that we can't actually get.
Okay.
No? So, cravings like that, still to crave anything is based upon a past experience that thing gave me pleasure once upon a time. And now the seed is ripening. Oh, I want that pleasure now. And whether we can get it or not is a different, right?
Yeah, it's our karma.
That's part of karma as well. And I think Nagarjuna would say, see proof that this desire that you're saying proves that my material world has its own nature, shows that it can't. Because if it did, and the desire was coming from the material world like you're thinking it is, then the same object would give the same amount of desire to everyone. And we wouldn't have desire for it until we contacted it. The thing would have to be there first before our desire for it arose, because it was coming from the thing.
Yeah, and all pregnant ladies would go crazy craving for whatever things comes to their mind.
Right. Or they wouldn't at all, right? And the
Right.
proof that you could be pregnant and not have cravings says that it doesn't happen that way to everybody. There's nothing in being pregnant that makes you have cravings,
Right.
right? Even though it's common. Yeah.
Lama, the Oriental explanation for pregnancy cravings are you are fulfilling the dreams of the fetus.
No, the baby
Yes.
wants pickles. That's sweet. Mhm. Yes, Tracy.
Okay, so can you help me? I think when I think about the nadis, the misunderstandings that we actually come into this world with as a little baby, it's like right out of the gate, we didn't have much hope when it comes to the misunderstandings.
Right.
But if the goal is to untie the nadis, the ones that are connected with desire and jealousy and emotion, then how is it? I'm thinking that they exist so that it gives me an opportunity to put these practices into practice to override the system to do what I need to do to get to where I want to go. So now in this moment, I'm like, what? They don't exist? Well, then what do I have to untie if there's no existence of them? So can you help me with Nagarjuna's perspective?
Yes. So when we say that this same argument is true for the subtle body and the knots and the two side channels tied around the central channel, it has no nature. And where your mind went was, oh, so it doesn't really exist. So what the heck am I doing? Trying to twist myself to untwist my channels, if it doesn't really exist. Is Nagarjuna pointing out that nothing really exists? No. He's pointing out that things exist by way of causes created by the way we've interacted with others. How in the world did I interact with others to cause their knots to get, right? Their channels to get all twisted up? What channels? I didn't even know about channels, right? Right? And it's like, yes and no. Do they exist? Yes. Are they self-existent things like our lungs and spleen and spine? No. Are our lungs and spleen and spine existing things? Yes, but with no more or less reality than your nadis, your channels, winds, and drops. None of them have their identities, qualities, functions in them from them. And so our ripening mental seeds as humans is that I have this physical body that has a brain and has lungs and has hearts. And then we learn about the subtle energy body. And now our seeds are ripening. I'm a human body that has brain, lungs, hearts, and this subtle body. Maybe there's an even more subtle level that doesn't exist from its own side, and so exists by way of projections. So did we have a subtle body before we knew anything about it? Yeah, I mean, you can say yes. Did you have lungs and stomach and bowels before you knew anything about them? Seemed like it, right? But can we have anything without our seeds ripening? No. Can we ripen seeds for things that we don't know what they are? Must have, because as infants, We pooped, we ate, we breathed, and we didn't know anything about lungs and bowels. Right? It's like the gears make smoke at how amazingly subtle and complicated are seeds ripening, seeds planting and seeds ripening. Like every seed planted has in it all aspects of that experience. So, does anybody have a pen? Yes. In the moment that the pen is given, there's a time, there's a season, there's a day, there's a feeling, there's an emotional, right? There's all kinds of stuff included in the seed that's planted at that moment. And all of that is, growing, diminishing until it gets over the threshold into manifestation. And when it manifests as all of that. It looks like just subject-object interaction. But with that, there's a season, there's a time of day, there's a how old I am, there's my whole background, right? It's all included, right, in all of it. And we're trying to unravel these pieces that help us be able to recognize, yes, it's happening, but not the way I think. So yes, you have Nadi's channels. You have a tool that you can work with that is more subtle than the physical body and so more malleable if we have sufficient concentration to work at that level, right? Winds and mind move in tandem. So it's not that, that's the answer for everybody, because it may not be. And yes, Nagarjuna says, no, they don't exist with their own natures as something that you will actually untie. But yes, you will someday have the seeds ripening, the result of what we would call untying those knots. Yeah.
And just one more quick thing. So when you say the quality of the earth is solidness, and the body is like the gross body connected with the earth, do you have a quality for this subtle state? Like, is there another word I can use, or is it still considered solid, but in a different form?
Right. So its solidity is very, very subtle in the same comparison as comparing like the solidity of this pen to a beam of light, right? The subtlety of our subtle body is more distinct from our physical body than this light is from a beam of light.
Super helpful. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Wind and mind, movement, vibration. All right. So well done. We're working with my material world does so exist because there are things in it I desire. They make me desire. Right? That's what we have to work with this week. So remember that person we wanted to be able to help. We've planted seeds through which we will someday help them in that deep and ultimate way. And that's an extraordinary goodness. So please be happy with yourself. And think of this goodness like a beautiful glowing gemstone that you can hold in your hands. Recall your own precious holy guide. See how happy they are with you. Feel your gratitude to them, your reliance upon them. Ask them to please stay close, to continue to guide you, help you, inspire you, and then offer them this gemstone of goodness. See them accept it and bless it. And they carry it with them right back into your heart. See them there, feel them there. Their love, their compassion, their wisdom. It feels so good, we want to keep it forever. And so we know to share it. By the power of the goodness that we've just done, may all beings complete the collection of merit and wisdom, and thus gain the two ultimate bodies that merit and wisdom make. So use those 3 long exhales to share this goodness with that one person. To share it with everyone you love. To share it with every existing being everywhere. See them all filled with happiness, filled with wisdom, filled with loving kindness, and may it be so. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.